I never thought this could happen to me. I mean, no one does, right? You get married, build a life, and assume the person you're with feels the same way. Camila and I had been together for 8 years, married for 6. From the outside, we were that couple everyone thought had it all: a cozy home, a loving marriage, plans for the future. But looking back, I can see how little signs started creeping in. Nothing huge at first, just small things I brushed off as stress or changes in routine. Like how she started staying late at work more often, or how her phone seemed glued to her hand, always flipped screen down on the table. I'd ask about it casually, not wanting to seem paranoid, and she'd laugh it off, calling me silly. "Max, I'm just busy," she'd say with that smile I used to love. "Don't worry so much." And I didn't, at least, not at first. But then came the excuses. Nights out with friends I'd never heard of, long silences where her texts used to be. When we were together, she seemed distracted, distant, like she was just going through the motions. One day, she canceled date night for the 3rd time in a row, saying she had to work late. I remember joking, "What, are you saving the world now?" She didn't even laugh. Just mumbled something about deadlines and hurried out the door. That was the first time it really hit me: something wasn't right. Still, I pushed the thought away. I loved her. I trusted her. And if I'm honest, I didn't want to believe there could be anything wrong with us. But then came the day everything changed. It wasn't long after that canceled date night when the seed of doubt started growing into something I couldn't ignore. A week later, I came home early from work. My boss had called it a day after a major project wrapped up, so I thought I'd surprise Camila with her favorite takeout and a bottle of wine. Walking into the house, I immediately noticed how quiet it was. Normally, even if she was working late, there'd be signs of her: shoes by the door, a jacket tossed over a chair. But that day it felt off. Her car was in the driveway, but the place felt empty. I called out, "Camila." No answer. My voice echoed back at me. I figured she was in the shower or maybe napping, so I set the food down on the counter and started up the stairs. As I got closer to our bedroom, I noticed the door was cracked open. That's when I heard it, a hushed voice, low and hurried, coming from inside. I froze. My heart started racing. It was like every muscle in my body told me to stop, to turn around and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But I couldn't. I took a step closer, straining to make out the words. "I told you, I'll handle it. Just, not now," she whispered. Her tone was sharp, almost annoyed, like she was brushing someone off. I pushed the door open a little more, just enough to see her sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone pressed to her ear. She wasn't crying or upset. If anything, she looked frustrated. Her back was to me, but I could tell from her posture that this wasn't a casual call. "Okay, fine," she said, exhaling sharply. "I'll figure something out. But I can't talk right now." Before I could step into the room, she hung up, tossing her phone onto the bed. I stood there for what felt like forever, unsure of what to do. Confront her? Pretend I hadn't heard anything? I chose the latter. Backing away quietly, I went downstairs and waited. When she finally came down, she acted like nothing had happened. Gave me a quick kiss, thanked me for the food, and asked about my day. I tried to play it cool, but inside, I was a mess. Who was she talking to? What couldn't she handle? And why didn't she feel like she could talk to me about it? That night, I barely slept. She lay beside me, scrolling through her phone, and all I could think about were those whispered words. I told myself it could have been anything: a coworker, a friend, maybe even her mom. But the pit in my stomach wouldn't go away. I needed answers. The following days were torture. Every time Camila's phone buzzed, my ears perked up. Every time she left the room to take a call, my stomach churned. She was still acting distant, distracted. When I'd try to start a conversation, she'd answer in clipped phrases or change the subject. The woman I thought I knew inside and out was slipping further and further away. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the nightstand. A message preview popped up. I told myself not to look, that I was just being paranoid, but curiosity got the better of me. I leaned over to glance at the screen. The message was from someone named Nina. It said, "Can't wait for Friday. Same time, right?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Friday? What was happening Friday? Nina was a name I'd never heard her mention before. When Camila came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped around her, I casually asked, "Hey, who's Nina?" She froze for a split second, just long enough for me to catch it. "Oh, she's a girl from work," she said quickly, heading to the closet. "Why? Just saw her name pop up on your phone. You don't usually talk about work friends." She didn't even turn around. "We're working on a project together. It's nothing interesting." Her answer didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. I knew pressing her would only make her defensive. Still, the doubt in my mind grew. Was I overreacting, or was there something she wasn't telling me? That Friday, she left the house around 6 p.m., saying she was meeting a friend for dinner. "Nina?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," she said, avoiding eye contact as she grabbed her bag. "Don't wait up, I might be late." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed my jacket and keys. Something told me I needed to know for sure. I followed her car from a distance, staying just far enough back to avoid suspicion. She drove across town and parked outside a restaurant. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe she really was just meeting a friend. But then I saw him. A tall guy in a crisp button-down walked up to her car, leaned in, and kissed her on the cheek. She smiled, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. There it was. Proof that everything I'd been dreading was true. They walked inside together, arm in arm, as if they didn't have a care in the world. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Should I confront her now? Go inside and blow up her perfect little secret? Or should I wait and gather more evidence? Eventually, I drove home, shaking with anger and heartbreak. I couldn't believe this was happening. The woman I'd given my heart to, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, was with someone else. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My world was falling apart, and I had no idea what to do next. The next morning, I felt like a ghost in my own home. Camila came back late, just as she'd said, but I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. I heard her moving around, quietly setting her things down, as if trying not to disturb me. The audacity of her pretending nothing was wrong burned me up inside. When I finally got up, she was in the kitchen, humming softly as she made coffee. She looked so at ease, like the woman I married, and for a moment, I doubted myself. But then I remembered the way she smiled at him, the way they walked into that restaurant like they were a couple. My stomach turned. "Morning," she said brightly, handing me a cup of coffee. "Morning," I mumbled, trying to sound normal. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to keep it together and figure out my next move. All day, I watched her closely, hoping for some kind of slip-up, a guilty look, a strange comment, anything. But she was calm, cheerful even. It made me question everything. How could she act so normal if she was living a double life? Did she think I was too stupid to notice? Or was she just that good at hiding it? I spent the rest of the weekend keeping my distance, my mind racing with questions. Who was that guy? How long had this been going on? Was I the only one who didn't know? By Sunday night, I couldn't take it anymore. While she was in the shower, I opened her laptop, praying it wasn't password protected. To my surprise, it wasn't. Her email was already logged in, and I started scrolling through her inbox, feeling like a spy in my own marriage. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary, work emails, newsletters, the usual. But then I found it. A thread of messages labeled Nina, which I quickly realized was code for him. "Last night was amazing," one of the emails read. "I can't stop thinking about you," said another. My chest tightened as I kept scrolling, reading message after message. They'd been meeting for months, dinners, weekends, even during the time she'd claimed to be visiting her mom out of town. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking. There it was, undeniable proof. She'd been lying to my face, betraying me every time she walked out that door. When she came out of the bathroom, towel drying her hair, she gave me a smile. "What are you doing?" she asked, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. I couldn't let her see how broken I felt. Not yet. That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with plans, ideas, questions. I couldn't let this slide, but I also couldn't blow up without a plan. I needed to know more, to figure out what I wanted, how I would handle this, and whether I even wanted to try to salvage anything. This wasn't just a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. This was betrayal. The next few days were a blur. Every smile Camila gave me, every casual touch, felt like a knife in my gut. It was surreal watching her go about her day, pretending everything was fine while I knew the truth. Part of me wanted to scream at her, demand answers right then and there. But the other part, maybe the smarter part, held back. I needed more than just a few emails. If I confronted her now, she'd deny it, twist the truth, make me feel like I was crazy. I had to be sure. On Wednesday, I decided to take a half day at work. I told her I was swamped and wouldn't be home until late, and she barely looked up from her phone when I left. But I didn't go to work. I parked a few blocks away and waited, heart pounding, palms sweating. Around noon she left the house, dressed casually but more put together than usual, jeans, a fitted blouse and heels. She didn't know I was watching. She drove to a coffee shop on the other side of town, and sure enough, he was there. They hugged when she walked in, a little too long for it to be innocent. They sat by the window, laughing and leaning in close. I took pictures. It felt disgusting, like I was invading her privacy, but I had no choice. This wasn't about catching her in the act, it was about protecting myself. I needed proof. After about an hour, they left together, heading to a nearby motel. My stomach churned as I watched them check in. I wanted to storm in, to confront them right then and there, but I couldn't move. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that they hurt. Instead, I sat there, staring at the motel door. Time dragged on. I couldn't stop thinking about all the nights she'd come home to me, smiling like nothing was wrong. All the times I'd held her, kissed her, trusted her. When they finally came out, I snapped more pictures. They didn't look guilty or rushed, just relaxed, like this was a regular thing. And maybe it was. I waited until she was home before going back myself. Walking into the house felt like walking into enemy territory. She greeted me like she always did, asking about my day, telling me she'd spent the afternoon shopping. I wanted to laugh at the boldness of her lie. Instead, I played along. "Find anything good?" I asked, my voice steady. "Just a few things," she said with a shrug, avoiding my eyes. That night, I couldn't look at her. I slept on the couch, claiming I had a headache, but the truth was, I couldn't stand the thought of being near her. The next morning, I started making plans. I couldn't live like this, pretending everything was fine. I needed to figure out what came next, for me, for us, and for the life I thought we had. The next morning, I woke up on the couch feeling worse than ever. My body ached from the restless sleep, and my mind was no better off. Camila was in the kitchen, humming to herself while making breakfast. How could she act so normal, so carefree, when everything was falling apart? I sat there, watching her. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was something deeper, a sadness that weighed on my chest. This was the woman I built a life with, the woman I thought I knew. And yet here she was, lying to my face, sharing herself with someone else. I needed to act. But how? I couldn't just confront her and let the rage take over. That wouldn't fix anything. If I wanted to come out of this with any shred of dignity, I had to be smart. That's when I decided to call a lawyer. I wasn't ready to file for divorce, not yet, but I needed to know my options. What would happen to the house? To our savings? What if this guy wasn't just some fling? What if she wanted to leave and take everything with her? I waited until Camila left for work, then made the call. The lawyer, an older guy named Mr. Pierce, was calm and matter-of-fact. He asked me to come in for a consultation, and by that afternoon, I was sitting in his office, laying out the mess of my marriage. He listened quietly, taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and gave me a sympathetic look. "You've got a tough road ahead, Max," he said. "But the good news is, you're taking the right steps. Gathering evidence, documenting her behavior, that's all going to help you if this goes to court." I showed him the pictures I'd taken at the coffee shop and the motel. He nodded, saying they were a good start, but that I might need more if Camila denied the affair. "It's not just about proving she's unfaithful," he explained. "It's about protecting yourself. Your finances, your home, your future." That hit me hard. My future. Up until now, I'd always pictured it with her. No matter what struggles we faced, no matter how tough things got, I thought we'd face them together. Now I wasn't so sure. By the time I left his office, I had a clear plan. I needed to keep gathering evidence. I needed to stay calm, no matter how much it hurt. And most importantly, I needed to figure out what I wanted, whether I was willing to fight for this marriage or let it go. When I got home, Camila was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled, asking how my day was. I forced a smile back, answering with some generic comment about work. Inside, though, I felt like I was living with a stranger. That night, while she slept, I started writing down everything. The dates, the emails, the pictures, every piece of evidence I'd collected. It felt cold, calculating, but it was the only way I could take control of the situation. And as I stared at the list in front of me, one thought kept running through my mind. This wasn't the life I signed up for. Why Friday? I couldn't keep it in anymore. The weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the constant pretending, was crushing me. I needed answers. That evening, Camila came home later than usual, carrying a shopping bag and looking unusually cheerful. She kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong and asked what I wanted for dinner. The sheer normalcy of it all made my blood boil. "Camila," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "We need to talk." She looked up, startled. "What's wrong?" I gestured toward the couch, and we both sat down. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Are you happy?" I asked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. "What do you mean?" "Of course I'm happy. With us," I clarified. "Are you happy in this marriage?" She hesitated, her smile faltering. "Max, where is this coming from?" "Just answer the question," I said, my voice steady but firm. She shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "I mean, we've had our ups and downs, but yes, I'm happy." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Then why do I feel like you're hiding something from me?" Her eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. "What are you talking about?" "You've been distant," I said, choosing my words carefully. "You cancel plans, you stay out late, you're always on your phone. Something's changed, Camila. And I need you to be honest with me." She laughed nervously, waving a hand. "Max, you're overthinking this. I've just been busy with work. You know how crazy things get sometimes." I stared at her, searching for any sign of remorse, any crack in her facade. "Then who's Nina?" I asked, my voice quiet but pointed. Her face froze. For a split second, I saw panic in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a laugh. "Nina? She's a coworker, like I told you." "Funny," I said, leaning back. "Because I followed you on Wednesday. And Nina isn't a coworker, is she?" Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she didn't know what to say. I pressed on. "I saw you with him, Camila. At the coffee shop. At the motel. Don't lie to me." She stared at me, her face pale. For a moment, I thought she might confess, might finally tell me the truth. But instead, she crossed her arms and said, "You were spying on me?" Her deflection stunned me. "That's what you're focusing on?" I shot back. "Not the fact that you're cheating on me." "I'm not cheating on you," she said, her voice rising. "You're being paranoid, Max. Following me, taking pictures. Do you even hear yourself? This is crazy. Stop lying." I shouted, unable to hold it in any longer. "I saw you with him, Camila. I have pictures, emails, everything. Don't stand there and insult my intelligence." She stood up, her arms shaking. "Fine," she snapped. "You want the truth?" "Yes, I've been seeing someone. But it's not what you think." I stared at her, my chest tightening. "Then tell me what it is," I said through clenched teeth. She hesitated, her expression softening. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said quietly. It just did. I was lonely, Max. You've been so busy with work, so distracted. I felt invisible." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No," she said quickly. "I'm not saying that. I made a mistake, okay? But it didn't mean anything. It's over now." I laughed bitterly. "Over? Do you think I'm stupid, Camila? I saw you with him this week. How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. "Max," she said, reaching for my hand. "I'm sorry. I pulled away, standing up. "Don't," I said coldly. "I need time to think." And with that, I walked out the door, leaving her standing there, her apology hanging in the air. I drove aimlessly for hours that night, replaying the conversation over and over in my head. Her words, her excuses, her attempt to shift the blame, they all felt like daggers. Every mile I put between us felt like a small relief, but it didn't stop the ache in my chest. Finally, I pulled into a quiet parking lot near the park where Camila and I used to take walks. I sat there, staring out the windshield, trying to make sense of everything. How had it come to this? Where had we gone wrong? My phone buzzed on the seat beside me, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was a text from her. "Max, please come home. We need to talk." I stared at the screen, torn between going back and staying as far away as possible. I couldn't face her, not yet. I needed clarity, space to figure out what came next. Instead of replying, I turned off my phone and leaned back in the seat, letting the quiet of the night wash over me. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the car windows. My back ached, my mouth was dry, and my mind was still a mess. Reluctantly, I turned my phone back on. The screen lit up with missed calls and texts from Camila. Most of them were variations of the same message. "I'm sorry. Please come home. Let's talk." I ignored them all and called my best friend, Adam. He picked up on the second ring. "Max? You okay, man?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "Not really," I admitted. "Can I come over?" "Of course. You don't even have to ask." When I arrived at Adam's place, he was already waiting at the door. He took one look at me and shook his head. "Come in. You look like you've been hit by a truck." I sat down on his couch and told him everything. Camila's lies, the affair, the confrontation. By the time I was done, I felt like I'd just run a marathon. Adam was quiet for a moment, then said, "Max, I don't know what to say. It's awful. I'm so sorry." "Yeah," I muttered. "Me too. You know you can't let her manipulate you, right?" he said. "This isn't on you. She made her choices." "I know," I said, though part of me wasn't sure I believed it. Adam leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "So what's the plan? Are you staying with her or?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't even know if I can look at her right now." "Take your time," he said. "But don't let her twist this around. You deserve better than that." His words stuck with me as I left his place and drove back home. Adam was right. I needed to stand my ground. But the thought of facing Camila again filled me with dread. When I walked into the house, she was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy. She looked up as I entered, her face lighting up with relief. "Max," she said softly, standing up. "I'm so glad you're back." I didn't respond. I set my keys on the counter and leaned against it, crossing my arms. "We're talking," I said flatly. "No more lies. No more excuses." She nodded, her hands trembling. "Okay. I'll tell you everything." And for the first time, she started to. Camila sat back down at the kitchen table, clasping her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. I stayed standing, keeping the counter between us. I didn't trust myself to sit too close. "Go on," I said, my voice cold and detached. "Tell me everything." She took a deep breath, looking anywhere but at me. "It started a few months ago," she began. "I didn't plan for it to happen. I swear, Max. It just did." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Who is he?" "His name is Daniel," she said quietly. "We met at a work event. He's in a different department." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Of course. And you just happened to connect, right?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't looking for anything, Max. I was feeling so disconnected from us. You were always working, always tired. I felt like we were just going through the motions." "That's your excuse?" I snapped. "Because I was working to provide for us, you decided to find someone else?" "No," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "I know it sounds terrible. I know I've hurt you. But I didn't do this to punish you or because I don't love you." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice trembling. "Don't you dare say you love me." She flinched but kept talking. "It was never serious. It was just a distraction. Someone who made me feel seen, wanted. But it didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You lied to me, Camila. You betrayed me. How can you sit there and say it didn't mean anything?" She wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. It's over now, she whispered. I ended it. When? I demanded. Her silence was all the answer I needed. I slammed my hand on the counter, making her jump. You didn't end it. You're still seeing him. I was going to end it, she cried. I didn't know how. I didn't want to hurt him. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. You didn't want to hurt him? I shouted. What about me, Camila? What about the life we built together? The vows we took? Did any of that matter to you? She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I'm sorry, she choked out. I'm so sorry. I stared at her, my chest heaving with anger and heartbreak. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the life I thought we had. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. I don't even know if I want to. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. Max, please, she begged. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. Please don't give up on us. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sobbing at the table. I needed time, space, anything to escape the suffocating weight of what she'd done. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Her words replayed in my mind over and over again. Every sorry, every excuse, every pathetic justification. Part of me wanted to believe her, to try and save what was left of our marriage. But the other part, the part that kept me awake, wondered if it was already too late. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Camila didn't come out of the bedroom, and I didn't bother going to check on her. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared out the window. My mind felt like a tornado, swirling with everything she'd said the night before. I thought about the years we'd spent together, the plans we'd made, the sacrifices I'd made for her and our life together. How could it all crumble so easily? Around mid-morning, Camila finally emerged, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept, and I felt a flicker of satisfaction at her discomfort. She sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap, and opened her mouth to speak. I've made an appointment for counseling, she said softly. We can go together. Work through this. I stared at her, my face blank. You think counseling is going to fix this? It's a start, she said. Max, I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust. But I want to make this right. I'll do whatever it takes. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. What about Daniel? I asked. Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. I told him it's over. I won't see him again. I promise. I laughed bitterly. Your promises don't mean much to me right now, Camila. She flinched, but I didn't stop. You want to go to counseling? Fine. But don't think for a second that it's going to erase what you've done. You destroyed everything we built together. And for what? Some guy who made you feel wanted? Max, please, she whispered, her voice cracking. I love you. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a scrape. You love me? You don't do this to someone you love, Camila. You don't lie, cheat, and then blame it on feeling invisible. Her tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. But I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. I need time to think, I said, grabbing my keys. Don't follow me. I ended up at Adam's place again. He didn't ask any questions, just handed me a beer and motioned for me to sit. What's the plan, man? He asked after a while. You sticking this out or walking away? I shook my head. I don't know. Part of me wants to fight for this, for everything we've built. But the other part... I trailed off, staring at the bottle in my hands. The other part doesn't know if I can ever look at her the same way. Adam nodded. That's fair. But whatever you do, make sure it's what you want. Not what she wants. Not what other people think you should do. What you need to move forward. His words stuck with me as I drove home. When I walked in, Camila was waiting for me, her face filled with hope. But I wasn't ready to give her any answers. Not yet. We'll try counseling, I said flatly. But don't mistake this for forgiveness, Camila. I'm not there yet. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't respond. I walked past her and into the guest room, shutting the door behind me. This was just the beginning, and I didn't know where it would lead. The first counseling session was scheduled for the following week. Camila had booked it with a highly recommended therapist, someone she said specialized in helping couples rebuild trust. I agreed to go, but I told her up front that I was doing it for myself as much as for us. The office was cozy, with neutral colors and soft lighting designed to make people feel safe. I didn't feel safe though. I felt exposed, raw. Camila sat beside me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. The therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Nolan, welcomed us and explained how the process would work. "This is a safe space for both of you to express yourselves," she said. "Honesty is key here. Even if it's uncomfortable, we need to get everything out in the open." I nodded stiffly. Camila gave a small, tearful nod. "Max," Dr. Nolan began, "why don't you start? Tell me what brought you here today." I took a deep breath, staring at the carpet. "My wife cheated on me," I said bluntly. "She lied, she betrayed me, and now she wants me to pretend like we can fix this." Camila let out a quiet sob, but I didn't look at her. Dr. Nolan nodded. "And how do you feel about that, Max? How do you think I feel?" I snapped, then caught myself. "Sorry. I'm angry. Hurt. Confused. I gave everything to this marriage, and now I'm questioning if any of it was real." "That's understandable," Dr. Nolan said gently. "Camila, how would you like to respond to that?" Camila's voice trembled as she spoke. "I'm sorry, Max. I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I love you, and I want to fix this. I want to make things right." I couldn't stop myself from scoffing. "You love me? Is that what you were thinking when you were sneaking off to see him?" Her tears came faster, but she didn't argue. Dr. Nolan stepped in. "Max, it's important to let Camila speak. This is her chance to explain, not justify, her actions. Camila, why don't you tell Max what led to this?" Camila wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. I felt lost. Like we were just roommates, not partners. "You were always so busy, and I didn't want to burden you with how I was feeling. And then I met Daniel, and he paid attention to me. He made me feel special." I clenched my fists. "And I didn't?" She shook her head quickly. "It's not that, Max. You've always been amazing. But I didn't know how to talk to you. I didn't know how to ask for what I needed. So instead of talking to me, you talked to him," I said bitterly. "Max," Dr. Nolan said softly, "I know this is hard, but let her finish." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Fine. Go ahead." Camila's voice broke as she continued. "It wasn't about replacing you. It was about filling this emptiness I felt inside. But it was wrong, and I know that now. I wish I could take it all back." The session ended with no resolution, just more questions. On the way home, Camila tried to hold my hand, but I pulled away. "Don't," I said quietly. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. Counseling might have been a step forward, but it felt like we were walking on a tightrope. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. The second counseling session came faster than I was ready for. Camila was eager, clinging to the hope that these talks would patch the gaping wound she'd torn in our marriage. I went along, not because I believed things could be fixed, but because I needed clarity, for myself, for the life I was trying to salvage. Dr. Nolan started by asking us to talk about what we valued in our marriage before the affair. I spoke about the trust we'd built, how we used to share everything, how we dreamed of building a family and growing old together. My voice cracked toward the end, but I pushed through. Camila, on the other hand, focused on how supported she had felt by me. She talked about how I was her rock, how I'd always made her feel safe, until she lost sight of that. Her words felt hollow to me, like she was trying to spin a narrative where she wasn't entirely at fault. Dr. Nolan listened patiently, then said, "Max, do you feel like you've been able to express your anger and pain fully? Or are you holding back?" "I've expressed it plenty," I said flatly. Dr. Nolan raised an eyebrow. "Sometimes, anger can mask other emotions, fear, sadness, even guilt. Do you feel any of those things?" The question caught me off guard. Guilt? For what? I opened my mouth to argue but stopped myself. Maybe I did feel guilty, for not noticing the cracks sooner, for not being enough to keep her faithful. But was that fair? "I don't know," I admitted. "That's a start," Dr. Nolan said. "Camila, how about you? What do you think Max is feeling that he hasn't said yet?" Camila hesitated. "I think he feels betrayed," she said softly. "Like he wasn't good enough for me. But that's not true. This isn't about him not being enough. It's about me not knowing how to handle my own feelings. Her words stirred something in me, but I couldn't tell if it was relief or resentment. The following days were tense but quiet. Camila was walking on eggshells, doing everything she could to make amends. She cooked dinner every night, cleaned without being asked, even left little notes for me on the counter. One morning, I found a note with my coffee mug. It read, "I know I've hurt you, and I'm not expecting forgiveness overnight. But I want you to know I'm here, and I love you." I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. It wasn't anger, I just couldn't take the forced sweetness, the constant reminders of her guilt. But despite everything, I noticed a shift in myself. The rage wasn't as sharp, the pain not as overwhelming. I didn't know if it was acceptance or numbness, but it scared me. One evening, Camila tentatively approached me while I was watching TV. "Max, can we talk?" I muted the show and looked at her. "What now?" I wanted to check in. "Are you feeling any differently about us? About everything?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know, Camila. I don't know if I ever will." Her face crumpled, and she nodded. "I understand. I'll keep trying." As she walked away, I felt a pang of guilt again. I wasn't trying, not like she was. But how could I, when I wasn't sure I even wanted to? That night, I lay awake in the guest room again, thinking about what Dr. Nolan had said. Anger masking fear, guilt, sadness. Maybe she was right. But how could I untangle all of it when every time I looked at Camila, all I saw was the man she chose over me? A week later, during our third counseling session, Dr. Nolan asked a simple but loaded question. "What does healing look like for each of you?" I sat in silence, trying to figure it out. Did healing mean forgiving her? Starting over? Or was it about finding a way to move on without her? Camila spoke first. "I want to rebuild what we had. I know it'll take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were pleading. When it was my turn, I finally said, "I don't know if healing means staying together. Right now, all I feel is broken. Like everything I thought was real is gone." Camila flinched, but she didn't argue. Later that night, she approached me as I stood in the kitchen, staring at the sink. "Max," she said softly, "if you need space, real space, I'll understand." I turned to look at her, and for the first time, I saw not just my wife but a stranger who had shattered the life we built. "Maybe I do," I admitted. She nodded, her face crumpling. "I'll stay at my sister's for a while. I just want you to be okay." For once, I didn't argue. The day Camila left was surreal. She packed a few bags quietly, moving around the house like a ghost. I stayed out of her way, not offering to help, not saying much at all. What was there to say? When she finally stood at the door with her keys in hand, she hesitated. "I'm not giving up on us, Max," she said softly. "I hope you don't either." I couldn't bring myself to respond. I just nodded and watched her walk out. The sound of the door clicking shut felt like a weight dropping on my chest. For the first time in years, I was alone in our house. The silence was deafening. I walked through the rooms aimlessly, my eyes falling on little reminders of her everywhere. The throw blanket she loved, her favorite mug, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. I thought the space would bring me relief, but it didn't. It just amplified everything I was feeling, the anger, the sadness, the loss. The first few days without her were strange. I fell into a routine of work, takeout dinners, and long nights staring at the ceiling. Adam checked in on me, inviting me over for drinks or a game, but I always declined. I didn't want to talk about it. The house felt emptier with each passing day. Even the things I hated about her absence, the silence, the lack of movement, felt wrong. It wasn't that I wanted her back, at least not yet. But I couldn't deny the gaping hole she'd left. I threw myself into work, staying late just to avoid coming home. It worked for a while, keeping my mind busy. But every time I walked through the door, reality hit me like a freight train. One night, about a week after she left, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of us on vacation, laughing at some joke I couldn't even remember. Selfies we'd taken in the kitchen while cooking dinner. Her smile, her laugh, it all felt so distant now. I put the phone down, unable to keep looking. How had it all gone so wrong? That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Camila. "I hope you're okay. If you need anything, I'm just a call away." I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to reply. Eventually, I typed back, "I'm fine. Take care." I didn't know if I meant it, but it was all I could manage. The next counseling session was the first one I attended alone. Dr. Nolan greeted me warmly and asked how I was feeling since Camila had left. "Lost," I admitted. "The space was supposed to help, but it hasn't." "What do you think is making it harder?" she asked. I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe it's the memories. Or maybe it's just the idea that everything I thought was solid wasn't." Dr. Nolan nodded. "That's a natural reaction to betrayal, Max. It shakes your sense of stability, not just in the relationship, but in yourself." "That's the part that scares me," I said quietly. "I don't know if I'll ever trust her, or anyone again." She leaned forward. "That's why it's important to take this time to figure out what you need. Healing isn't about rushing to forgiveness or moving on. It's about rebuilding yourself, piece by piece." I left the session feeling slightly lighter, but the weight of the decision ahead still loomed. That weekend, Adam finally convinced me to come over for a barbecue. A few of our old friends were there, and for a few hours, I felt almost normal. We laughed, played cards, and talked about everything except my marriage. But when I got home, the emptiness hit me all over again. The silence, the memories, the ache in my chest, it all came rushing back. I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where Camila used to sit, and for the first time, I allowed myself to cry. It wasn't just sadness, it was anger, grief, and exhaustion all rolled into one. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living like this. 2 weeks after Camila left, I found myself standing in our living room, staring at the life we'd built together. The pictures on the walls, the furniture we'd picked out, even the dented coffee table we'd argued over keeping, all of it felt like a relic of something I couldn't get back. I picked up one of the framed photos, a picture of us on our honeymoon. We were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, the ocean behind us. For a moment, I felt a pang of longing for that version of us, for the simplicity of being happy and in love. But that version was gone. That evening, Camila texted me again. "Can we meet? I'd like to talk." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Okay. Tomorrow." The next day, we met at a park halfway between the house and her sister's place. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much since we'd last spoken. "Thanks for meeting me," she said softly. I nodded, keeping my distance. "What did you want to talk about?" She hesitated, then said, "I just wanted to see how you're doing. And to tell you that I'll understand if you decide you can't do this anymore." Her honesty caught me off guard. "You're giving up?" "No," she said quickly. "But I don't want to force you into something you don't want. I know I've hurt you in ways that might never heal. And if you decide this is too much, I'll respect that." Her words hung in the air, heavy with finality. I looked at her, searching for something, anything, that could guide my decision. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," I admitted. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I understand. But I want to earn it, Max. If there's even a chance, I'll do whatever it takes." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Finally, I said, "I need time. Real time. I'm not making any decisions right now." She wiped her eyes and gave a small, sad smile. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." When I got home, I sat down and wrote out everything I was feeling. The anger, the sadness, the betrayal, it all poured onto the page. By the time I finished, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I wanted to. But I did know one thing: I needed to focus on myself first. I started making changes, small at first. I joined a local gym, something I'd always talked about but never got around to. I reconnected with old friends, went out for drinks, started saying yes to invitations instead of isolating myself. The house still felt empty, but it didn't hurt as much. Slowly, I began to reclaim it, not as the home we'd built together, but as a space that was mine. Months passed. Camila and I kept in touch, mostly through counseling and occasional texts. She was patient, giving me the space I'd asked for, but I could tell she was hoping for reconciliation. I wasn't sure if I could give her that. Some days, I thought about trying. Other days, I felt certain I'd never be able to look at her without seeing the betrayal. In the end, I realized there was no rush. Healing wasn't a race, and I didn't need to have all the answers right away. For now, I was focusing on me, on rebuilding the pieces of myself that had been shattered. Whether or not Camila would be part of my future, I couldn't say. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally starting to move forward. And that was enough.